For 36 years, between 1787 and 1823, wealthy families across colonial America sent their troublesome sons to St. Augustine Seminary in Virginia for spiritual correction and religious education. Not one of those young men ever made it back home. According to church records, 247 students were enrolled during this time, yet not a single one graduated as an ordained priest. What became of them stayed a mystery until 1998, when renovation workers uncovered documents revealing that the seminary had actually been an elaborate extortion and prison operation disguised as religious instruction. Few channels dare to tell this story because the Sterling family's influence still runs deeper than most people realize. Before we go on with the story of Father Edmund Sterling and his unholy seminary, make sure to hit that notification bell and subscribe to this channel, as this kind of content is reserved for true mystery investigators. And in the comments, tell us which state you're listening from. The Sterling family had always understood that knowledge was the most dangerous inheritance of all. Colonial Virginia in 1787 was a land of vast plantations, growing tobacco fortunes, and families whose wealth relied on secrets best kept buried. The Tidewater region, with its maze of rivers and isolated estates, offered the perfect cover for those who liked to conduct their business away from prying eyes. It was here, in Henrico County, that the Sterling family had established themselves as pillars of both faith and commerce. Born in 1751, Edmund Sterling was the third son of a tobacco merchant who had made his fortune through methods polite society chose not to examine too closely. Unlike his brothers, who took over the family's legitimate businesses, Edmund received something far more valuable: an understanding of the darkest corners of human nature and the ability to exploit them with surgical precision. When he announced his plan to establish a Catholic seminary in Protestant Virginia, his family dismissed it as an embarrassing religious fervor. They had no idea it would become the foundation of the most profitable criminal enterprise in colonial America. Built in 1786 on 340 acres of dense woodland, St. Augustine Seminary was far enough from Richmond to ensure privacy, yet close enough for wealthy families to visit their sons. The Gothic stone buildings, imported craftsmen, and genuinely impressive library gave it an air of scholarly legitimacy. Edmund Sterling, who had briefly studied at the College of William and Mary before claiming a religious calling, styled himself as Father Sterling and surrounded himself with a small staff of men whose past credentials were as questionable as their present loyalties. Through the network of Virginia's elite families, the seminary's reputation spread quickly. Here was a Catholic institution run by a man of impeccable breeding, offering to educate young men who had proven problematic for their families. Sons who asked too many questions about business practices, who had witnessed things they shouldn't have, or who possessed information that could destroy family fortunes. The seminary promised not just education, but discretion, isolation, and most importantly, transformation. What these families didn't realize was that Father Sterling had no intention of teaching their sons theology. He was far more interested in educating himself about their family secrets, their business dealings, and most crucially, exactly how much they would pay to keep certain information buried forever. In the spring of 1787, the first students arrived. 12 young men between 16 and 23 sent by families whose names appeared on shipping manifests, land deeds, and government contracts across Virginia and the Carolinas. Each family paid the substantial enrollment fee of £50 sterling, enough to build a small house, and promised additional contributions for their sons' spiritual development. They believed they were investing in discretion and redemption. In reality, they were financing their own destruction. The autumn of 1789 brought the first hint that something at St. Augustine Seminary was fundamentally wrong, though it would take decades for anyone to piece together the full scope of Father Sterling's operation. Jonathan Whitmore, the eldest son of a Charleston shipping magnate, had been enrolled at the seminary after discovering discrepancies in his father's cargo manifest, discrepancies that suggested the family business included more than tobacco and rice. When October came and went without the usual letter home, the Whitmore family dispatched their trusted overseer, Thomas Hartwell, to check on their son's progress. What Hartwell found at St. Augustine defied explanation. The seminary appeared to be functioning normally. He could hear evening prayers drifting from the chapel, see lights in the study hall windows, and observe the daily routines of a religious institution. But when he asked to see Jonathan specifically, Father Sterling's response was peculiar. The young man was in deep spiritual retreat, Sterling explained, having undergone a profound religious awakening that required complete isolation from worldly concerns, including family correspondence. Hartwell, a man who had spent 30 years managing the Whitmore family's more delicate affairs, recognized evasion when he heard it. He asked to at least glimpse Jonathan during evening prayers to assure the family of his well-being. Father Sterling agreed, but with a strange condition. Hartwell must observe from the back of the chapel in shadow and must not attempt to make contact. That evening, as twilight gathered around the stone walls of St. Augustine, Hartwell positioned himself in the chapel's rear alcove. What he witnessed would haunt him for the rest of his life, though he would never fully understand what he had seen. The young men filing into evening prayers moved with an unnatural uniformity, their faces bearing expressions of serene compliance that seemed almost vacant. They responded to the liturgy in perfect unison, never glancing toward the visitors section, never showing the restlessness or individual quirks one would expect from young men confined together. Most disturbingly of all, when Hartwell counted the participants, he found only 19 figures in the pews, though Father Sterling had claimed to have 37 students enrolled. Among those 19 faces in the dim candlelight, Hartwell thought he recognized Jonathan Whitmore, but the young man who had left Charleston as a spirited, rebellious heir apparent now sat with the glassy devotion of someone who had forgotten his own name. When Hartwell returned to Charleston and reported his observations to the Whitmore family, they faced an impossible choice. Their son appeared to be alive and well, receiving the spiritual guidance they had requested, but something fundamental had changed in him, and demanding his immediate return might provoke questions about why he had been sent away in the first place. The Whitmores chose silence, as Father Sterling had calculated they would. They continued their payments to St. Augustine Seminary, telling themselves and their social circle that Jonathan had found his calling in religious life. It was easier than confronting the alternative, that they had delivered their firstborn son into the hands of something far worse than the scandal they had sought to avoid. Over the following months, similar scenes played out across Virginia's network of powerful families. Sons sent to St. Augustine for spiritual correction were writing letters home, but the letters were strangely uniform in their expressions of devotion and contentment. Parents who visited found their children changed in ways that couldn't quite be articulated, more compliant, less curious, eerily peaceful with their circumstances. None of these families spoke to each other about their concerns. The very nature of why their sons were sent to St. Augustine ensured that silence was preferable to investigation. And Father Sterling counted on that silence as carefully as he counted the rising fees he charged for their continued spiritual development. As the 1790s progressed, St. Augustine Seminary's reputation grew among Virginia's elite circles, but always in whispered conversations and coded recommendations. The institution had become something unique in colonial society, a place where inconvenient sons could be sent without the social stigma of public scandal or the permanent separation of disinheritance. The families who used Father Sterling's services found themselves trapped in a web of mutual complicity. Each had sent a son to St. Augustine for reasons they couldn't publicly acknowledge, creating a network of shared secrets that bound them to silence. The Randolph family had enrolled their youngest after he discovered their uncle's slave trading, roots that violated both Virginia law and family reputation. The Carters sent their heir apparent when he began asking questions about missing tenant farmers on their Rappahannock plantations. The Byrds delivered their son after he witnessed a midnight meeting that connected his father to a series of accidental deaths among business rivals. What none of these families realized was that Father Sterling was methodically documenting every secret, every scandal, every piece of compromising information that had led to their son's enrollment. His private study, located in the seminary's tower room, contained detailed files on each family's vulnerabilities, complete with names, dates, locations, and witness testimonies provided by their